The following is sponsored programming and does not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of KHTS or its ownership.
Does God want a separation of church and state? Should Christians be voting biblical principles? Does it really matter who you vote for? Join Pastor Jerry Cook as he endeavors to answer these and many other questions over the next hour on Politics in the Pulpit. And now, Pastor Jerry Cook.
Good afternoon, and thanks for tuning in to Politics and the Pulpit here on your hometown station, 98.1 or AM 1220. Not to be confused with Coast FM, because there's a lot of Christmas music on this channel. So if you are glad for this hour and a little reprieve from the Christmas music, this is your holy host, Pastor Jerry Cook. And as usual, we have a great show on tap for you today. We're going to be welcoming two guests in. Alexander Haberbush is the president and founder of Lex Rex Institute. They are a pro bono law firm in Long Beach, California, much like the ADF and Pacific Justice Institute. But we'll have Alexander Haberbush calling in a little bit. And then rounding out the show today, we'll have Pastor Max Graves talking about an effort that their church is going to be pushing this coming Friday in reference to abortion rights and things of that nature. So we'll talk to him rounding out the show today. But first of all, let's just get this dirty laundry out of the way. Herschel Walker was bested by the warlock in Georgia during yesterday's special election. Now, let's just be honest. The Republicans knew going into this that the best we could do is 50-50 in terms of a Senate. Now, I get it in terms of seats and all that kind of stuff. It would have been better to have a 50-50 split, but now that is not the case. What does this mean for the Senate? Well, it means that Kamala Harris can remain in her cave and will not have to be the tie-breaking vote, as the Democrats will have 51 and the Republicans will have 49. It also means that the Republicans in the House will have to make sure nothing gets past them in order to go to the Senate. Let me say that again. This means the Republicans in the House, because the Republicans have control as of January, will have to make sure nothing gets past them in order to go to the Senate. Leftist and immoral legislation need to die in the House. Actually, you can say leftist and immoral kind of in the same sentence, but leftist and immoral legislation needs to die in the House. The Republicans need to put a stake in the heart of whatever leftist mantra comes through the House. And might I also say, the Republicans had better deliver in that respect. Not sure at this point who the Republican speaker will be, because obviously Chip Roy and Andy Biggs and some of these guys are making noise saying that it's not going to be McCarthy, that he doesn't have the votes in the House. He needs 218 in order to become speaker. But whether the speaker is McCarthy or whomever the speaker might be, they had better keep those Republicans disciplined or else. A lot of Republicans are going into this cycle pretty demoralized. I mean, not necessarily me, but there are a lot of Republicans out there that are demoralized, mainly because, first of all, the outcome of the midterm elections in November. A lot of it didn't go the way they thought it was going to go, or at least the way the press was promoting it, that it was going to be this red tsunami. And it wasn't much of a trickle, to be honest with you, even though there were parts of the country where the red tsunami did hit. And then, of course, last night, with Herschel Walker not winning and the warlock indeed winning, you have a little bit more of a concern going forward. So, but say what you want about Walker, and there's a lot that we can say about Walker. He delivered a classy concession speech last night. Sorry, my tongue got in the way of my mouth. He delivered a classy concession speech last night. And here is what Herschel Walker said. It's about a minute clip. Listen to this.
Never stop dreaming. I don't want any of you to stop dreaming. I don't want any of you to stop believing in America. I want you to believe in America and continue to believe in the Constitution and believe in our elected officials most of all. Continue to pray for them because all the prayers you've given me, I felt those prayers. I want to thank all my team as well, Team Herschel, because they put up with a lot. I want to thank Team Herschel. Thank all my donors as well, because you guys, without you, I couldn't have done what I've done. So I want to thank all of you as well, because there's no excuses in life. And I'm not going to make any excuses now, because we put up one heck of a fight. And I said, that's what we got to do, because this is much bigger. This is much bigger than Herschel Walker. And I told someone this the other day. I said, you guys, I've done a lot of stuff. You talk about Heisman Trophy, you talk about all the athletic awards, business awards I won, but the best thing I've ever done in my whole entire life is run for the Senate seat right here.
Well, Herschel did not deliver the touchdown. Seems as if the Warlock bested him. But it was a classy concession, nevertheless. There's more that was said, and all I can say is going forward, Herschel, if he decides to run again, hey, he's got name recognition. There's no doubt about that. And you have to consider the fact that this was a first-time Senate run. And we're not talking about a congressional run. We're not talking about a House of Representatives run here. We're talking about a Senate run. So there was a lot to be learned, as a matter of fact, by Herschel. And I think he'll be stronger should he decide to run for office again. But the fact is, my advice for Republicans going forward would be, number one, we need to vet our candidates a little better. What do you say, what do you mean, vet our candidates a little better? We should have been prepared for the Warlock's October surprise against Herschel about the women that he impregnated and then paid for the abortions. Whether it's true or not, we should have been ready for something like that. So number one, we need to vet our candidates better. Number two, we need to learn to play hardball like the opposing team. You say, what do you mean, learn to play hardball, preacher? You mean to tell me we got to act like the left does? No, not necessarily. I want you to think about this. In many of the states that we were competing in on November during the midterms, the election laws that have been passed have clearly moved in a more democratic direction in regards to early voting and the like. Now, I know Republicans, conservatives, we don't like early voting. I get it. I'm an election day voter myself. I get it. To be honest with you, I think election day voting was probably stymied a bit here in California because that was the one day California had a rainstorm. And who knows how many California conservatives did not go out because they didn't want their hair to get wet or they just washed their car the day before and they didn't want to take it out. I don't know. But it's very possible that that rainstorm may have had an effect here in California. I understand that it was raining in portions of Georgia yesterday, but there was still record turnout, and a lot of folks came out for this special election. But the fact is, going forward, we need to realize that early voting, especially in a lot of these states like California, we'd better take full advantage of that. Conservatives had better start playing the game with the rules that we have instead of complaining about the rules that we don't have. And therein is the issue. That means conservatives might as well take full advantage of early voting. Why not? The left is. If you have 30 days of early voting in your state, why wouldn't you start voting? Now, I know we all say things like, well, it's not going to get counted. It's going to get thrown on the floor. As soon as they see a Republican insignia there, they're going to just throw it out. Listen, in places like California, you can track your ballot and actually see it go ding where they've actually counted it. And now I've not done that because I'm the kind of guy that still votes on election day. But you know what? That might change in 2024. I might actually vote early. See, why let the left have the early vote advantage? This is why on election night we get all discouraged when the Democrat is up by 30 points against the candidate that ultimately is going to win. We're thinking, how in the world? For instance, let's take our California governor here. Do you know how they're able to project that Gavin Newsom won against Brian Dahle like 10 seconds after 8 o'clock on November 7th? Because of early voting. They can project that there's no way that Dahle on Election Day voting can overtake the advantage that Newsom had. So this means that conservatives going forward might as well take full advantage of early voting if your state has it. And again, the left takes full advantage of this. That's what happened in Pennsylvania, where Uncle Fester beat out the Wizard of Oz. I mean, there you go. You got Uncle Fester who can't put a sentence together, who you know his wife is ultimately going to be the de facto senator of Pennsylvania, and he ends up beating out Dr. Oz. Why? Early voting. Oz never, ever once during that during the vote count on November 7th led against Fetterman. Not that I can remember. It was always Fetterman. Why? He had such an early advantage. Now, again, I would suggest that a guy like Fetterman is a great argument for why early voting is bad, because who knows how many people might have regretted their early vote for Fetterman once they actually saw his debate performance. But the fact of the matter is, it didn't matter. They made sure that debate was way at the end of October when a huge group, big swath of early voting had already been done, and that the debate wouldn't have much of an impact. Why? It's October 27th. It's only a week away from the election. Who cares? See, they were so good. Dr. Oz should have pushed for an earlier debate. But again, that's relitigating the past. Why even do that? But again, the reason why you guys, we've got Uncle Fester in Pennsylvania. The reason why we've got the Warlock down there in Georgia. And that's the reason why we've got several other, like for instance, Nevada, same thing. Why? Early voting. Democrats have the advantage. The other problem that conservatives are going to have to face going forward is whether or not we're going to have a Christ-centered conservatism or a culture-centered conservatism. They say, what do you mean by that, preacher? Well, I'm a preacher, so obviously this is going to be real easy for me. See, the problem the conservatives are facing right now is they're facing an identity crisis. Now, I am speaking as a Bible-believing Christian, so obviously I am going to be pushing for a Christ-centered conservatism, not a culture-centered conservatism. Let me put it another way. A Savior-centered conservatism as opposed to a secular-centered conservatism. In my humble opinion, conservatism seems to be moving and trending and embracing a more culture-centered conservatism that is more pragmatic and doesn't really rile up everybody on the independent side and on the left. But the problem with that philosophy is it's also really not riling up the base. If you don't have a riled up base, then you're not going to have a lot of momentum going into some of these elections. So again, in my humble opinion, I see conservatism at a crossroads. I see an identity crisis going forward. Conservatism seems to be moving and trending and embracing a more culture-centered conservatism that is not based upon a solid standard or authority, a.k.a. the Bible. Now you say, oh, preacher, come on now. Are you trying to set up a theocracy? Not at all. See, that's exactly where you guys go. All I'm saying is there's a standard. How do you even know you're not supposed to murder? Well, because the law says so. Well, where did the law get that? Well, they got that from the Code of Hammurabi. No, they got it from the Bible. The founders got it from the Bible. And the founders read through Sir William Blackstone's commentaries on the laws of England, who he himself got it from the Bible. You have to understand, this thing all goes back to a final authority. And if conservatism wants to be based upon a solid authority, then that's good. But unfortunately, I think what is happening is conservatism, instead of being based upon a solid standard or authority, like the Word of God, I think they are now kind of trending and embracing a more cultural savvy conservatism. In other words, wherever the culture is headed, we want to kind of go that way so we don't look peculiar and out of step. In other words, as I ranted last Wednesday on this show, I think a lot of our conservative friends are not going to be conserving a whole lot going forward. Which again brings me back to one of the things that I think the conservatives had better start doing going forward is we need to vet our candidates better. We need to make sure that our candidates are indeed conservative, have a Christ-centered conservatism, not a cultural-centered conservatism. They have a Savior-centered conservatism, not a secular-centered conservatism. Which brings me to the topic that I'd like to rant about for a few minutes that is going to segue into our first guest today, Alexander Haberbush, after the break. I'd like to rant about this so-called Respect for Marriage Act. You say, well, didn't you talk ad nauseum about that last Wednesday, Pastor Cook? Well, yeah, but it's this week, either tomorrow or Friday, when this bill will be brought to the House and will ultimately be voted on and then brought to the president's desks for Biden to sign. This bill will be going before Congress, again, either tomorrow, Thursday, or this Friday, unless it gets postponed for some reason and it goes to next week. But they're going to try to pass this bill before the Christmas break, trust me. You have to understand, Nancy Pelosi is still the leader of the House. It's not until January that we have a new leader. So Nancy's still the leader at the moment. They are going to push in this lame duck session for a federal bill that is going to federally recognize same-sex marriage in the states which do. And the most frustrating thing about this bill to me is that Republicans do not need to have their fingerprints on it, yet they have chosen to fall on their collective swords, and I don't know why, which again is why I'm surmising that the conservatives are at a crossroads. There's some sort of shift happening here. Again, the Republicans do not need to have their fingerprints on this bill. We had 12 Republicans in the Senate vote for this, and I listed their names last Wednesday. You can go on Right Scoop, Red State, Drudge Report. You can go on all those sites, and you can find something with their names. And then there were 47 in the House that all voted to advance this bill. By the way, I have actually notified the congressman for my district, and he seems inclined to vote for this bill again. And again, I don't know why. This is a lame duck session of Congress. The Democrats still have the majority in the House, and they still have a 50-50 Senate with Kamala coming in from wherever she's hiding in order to cast the tie-breaking vote. You know what I say? I say let the Democrats pass this bill. Let the Democrats have their fingerprints on this bill, but Republicans, for some reason, are all over it. And I don't know why. The problem, maybe it's the words we're using, or rather, the words the left is using to define the issue. For instance, we believe in marriage. Everyone believes in marriage. The only problem is if we put the two words same-sex in front of the word marriage. Now we have a problem, at least in my opinion. There's only one union on the face of the earth that's going to continue the next generation, and it's the union between a man and a woman. Period. End of story. There's no more debate. You don't have to get past Genesis chapter 1 to know that truth. I've said this to my congregation 1,000 times, and I'll say it right now. You put a man and a woman on an island alone, preferably good-looking ones, and within a generation, you're going to have a town pop up. It's just the way it works. But if you put a guy and a guy or a gal and a gal on an island, they're going to die within their own generation. Why? Because there's no such thing as perpetuity with same sex. I know it makes us feel good, makes us feel like we're so progressive, we're advancing forward, but in reality, all you have to do is a little homework on this, folks, Check the societies down through history that embrace this and find out how long they lasted as a society afterwards. When we return on Politics in the Pulpit here on your hometown station, we're going to have Alexander Haberbush, president of Lex Rex Institute in Long Beach, California, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, so-called Respect for Marriage Act. You're listening to Politics in the Pulpit here with your holy host, Pastor Jerry Cook, on KHTS, your hometown station, 98.1 FM and AM 1220. All right, we're back here on Politics in the Pulpit with your irreverent Reverend Pastor Jerry Cook on your hometown station, FM 98.1 and AM 1220. We were talking about the Respect for Marriage Act before the break, and I had teased that we were going to have Alexander Haberbush from the Lex Rex Institute in Long Beach, California. I had the privilege of meeting Alexander a few weeks ago at a political rally, and I was one of the two pastors that came up to him and actually knew what Lex Rex meant, not exactly because I was a graduate of any kind of school that had, that type of language. But the fact is, he's the founder and president of the Lex Rex Institute and currently spearheads LRI's involvement in constitutional jurisprudence. Alexander, would you say hello to the Politics in the Pulpit crowd?
Hi. Yeah, thank you, Jerry. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. I was impressed when I heard you on the dais the evening I was there, and I had not heard of your institute until the day I met you. Did know what Lex Rex meant, but did not know of your institute. But tell us a little bit about yourself, Alexander, before we rush into this topic.
Sure. So for those of you who don't know Latin, Lex Rex is Latin for the law is king, and that's exactly what we stand for as an organization. We want to ensure that the law remains the only king in the United States, not Gavin Newsom, not Joe Biden, none of those folks. The law is over all of them, and they're subject to it. So we practice constitutional law. We've been sort of leading the charge to invalidate some of the employer vaccine mandates we've been seeing in the past several years. We currently have a lawsuit pending in Los Angeles against the vaccine requirement for poll workers. We have a variety of constitutional law legal matters that we're pursuing. Attorney for Mike Lindell. I've worked for President Donald Trump during the 2020 election challenges, currently representing an Alaska state representative, stuff of that nature. We defend free speech, rest of the constitutional rights as well.
Well, hopefully the free speech we're about to engage in will not be censored here.
That's hope.
Yeah, exactly. But we were talking about the Respect for Marriage Act. This has been a big deal, at least for me, and hopefully for believers across the nation. And again, as I mentioned last week on my show, this thing is called Respect for Marriage Act, and it's amazing how these names don't exactly apply. There's no respect for marriage at all.
You know, that's typical. Any law Congress is passing, if it has a name that's euphemistic like that, you can rest assured it's going to do almost the exact opposite every time.
Absolutely.
That's true here, too.
There's no doubt about it. And so what I wanted to talk to you about, among other things, is first of all, let's just kind of give everybody an idea of what this act would do once it's signed into law by the current occupant of the White House. Would this bill basically recognize same-sex marriage federally across the 50 states, or only the states that actually recognize same-sex marriage?
Yeah, so there's two separate sections of this bill, but doing really both of those things. But the general, broad, overall intention of passing a bill like this is to sort of codify, put into a legal code what was ruled in Oberfeld back in 2015. That was the Supreme Court that recognized that same-sex marriage was, they claimed, a constitutionally protected right, and that all states were required to recognize same-sex marriages as legitimate. Now, given the Dobbs decision, that was the one that overturned Roe v. Wade, makes it so that abortion is no longer mandated to be legal in all 50 states. Democrats in Congress are worried that's going to be expanded further, possibly to cases like Oberfeld or even Loving. I've heard some people voicing concern that will happen. So this is meant to codify the ruling of Oberfeld.
So as of right now, that ruling isn't codified from 2015.
That's correct, yeah.
And that means,
and I think that the left is aware that it's a very bad ruling, so they
Sure.
know that it's on thin ice, and they want to make sure that if it does get overruled, then they're going to have something that guarantee the same effect.
And one of the things I was writing about before you came on, Alexander, is this is a lame duck session of Congress. The Democrats have got the majority in the House. They've got the 50-50 Senate with Kamala Harris coming in to break the tie.
Mm-hmm.
Republicans do not need to have their fingerprints on this bill at all. Yet, we had 12 Republicans last week in the Senate that voted for the passage of this bill and 47 in the House that voted several weeks ago to advance this bill. Why do you think Republicans feel like that it's necessary to fall on their collective swords on this issue?
Well, there's so I don't know if you read much of the left-wing discussion on this, but I get a few left-wing periodicals just to be aware of what they're saying about things. But there's a whole contingent on the far left that very strongly dislikes the Respect for Marriage bill because there's nothing in it basically guaranteeing the federal government's going to discriminate against people's religious rights. Mm-hmm. They want all kinds of non-discrimination language to be thrown into this bill, things of that nature. I think some of the Republicans would rather bite the bullet and get a bill that preserves the status quo than risk one that is far more expansive later on. Now, I think that's wrong-headed. It's accomplishing half of the goal is as good as accomplishing none of the goals.
Sure. Yeah, one of the things I was talking about before the break was I believe that conservatism is essentially at a crossroads here going forward, where we have a conservatism that's either going to embrace a more culture-centered conservatism as opposed to a Christ-centered conservatism. Mm-hmm. And I think what's happening is we have conservatives that are basically saying, well, we're not really going to conserve, even that's essentially what they're supposed to be doing as a conservative. And instead of conserving our ideals and conserving what they're supposed to be conserving, they're actually redefining or misdefining or whatever the case might be. And it seems like conservatism is kind of at a crossroads. Do you think that somehow conservatism is indeed at a crossroads where they're embracing a more cultural conservatism rather than a Christ-centered one?
I think so, yeah. Well, and it's conservatism, I would say historically, I go back to the Burkean definition of conservatism. Uh-huh. Edmund Burke, who was the famous parliamentarian of the late 18th century, who famously argued on behalf of the American colonies in Parliament back when King George was trying to impose all of his laws on us. And his idea of conservatism was, we do want progress, we do want social change, we want to make sure things are more just for our society, but we want that to be grounded in our institutions and traditions.
Yeah.
And I would say that our religious institutions and traditions are a central, if not the central part of that, as are our constitutional traditions. Yeah. And I would say that by compromising on things of this nature, particularly if somebody is in government, that person has sworn an oath to the Constitution of the United States. They're being derelict in their duty if they would sacrifice constitutional governance in exchange for certain cultural gains here and now.
Yeah. One of the things that I had called my personal representative for here in our district was, what's the problem with accepting some of these amendments that were rejected? For instance, Mike Lee from Utah, an amendment was rejected a few days ago. Chip Roy in Texas, an amendment to kind of strengthen the wording in terms of religious liberty, but yet both of those amendments were rejected or just not even voted on.
Right.
Why do you think they would reject these amendments that would at least bring some sort of solace to middle-of-the-ground evangelicals, where even a guy like me wouldn't even like the amendments because I don't like anything about this bill, period. But at least it would offer a little bit of play. Why do you think they rejected these amendments?
Well, I think we see exactly why. There's a case pending before the Supreme Court right now. They actually just heard oral argument on Monday on a case where it's very, very similar to the bakery case from a few years ago, the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, except this time it's a web design company who has denied service to same-sex marriages. Mm-hmm. And I think that's exactly why, is they're hoping for more victories eventually in the court. Right now, the makeup of the court is predominantly constitutional, originalist judges, responsible judges, but they're hoping to change that composition and win on this stuff down the road. If they get something set in stone by an enactment of Congress saying they won't discriminate in that fashion, then they no longer have the avenue to do that in the future when they feel that they have the political power to discriminate again.
Yeah. One of the things I'd mentioned to our congressman was, our church, Freedom's Way Baptist, we don't have a mega congregation like some churches do, and we don't also have a mega supply of money. And so you've got Jack Phillips, who has been in litigation since 2017. And then you've got this Colorado web designer, ironically, both of these individuals from Colorado.
Yeah. Their enforcement's been particularly draconian over there.
Yeah, it has. It has. And
yeah.
I just came from that state a few weeks ago on an elk hunt, and I kind of feel bad and dirty leaving him money. But the fact of the matter is, both of these individuals reside in Colorado. Both of these individuals, these situations date back between 6 and 7 years ago. You know, most churches, average churches, but churches between 50 to 150 people, they don't have an endless supply of resources to be able to just constantly bring things before the court. And now, granted,
Right.
not Pacific Justice, but ADF, I think, is representing both of these cases. And obviously, they're doing things pro bono. But again, unless you have that advantage, man, there's a lot of money going out.
Yeah, well, I mean, we deal with that firsthand every day because we're a nonprofit constitutional group trying to defend our clients without having to charge them. But you got to get donations to be able to do that.
Sure. So what do you think are the downstream effects of this bill should it get passed? I'm not worried about 2 months from now, 3 months from now, but I'm looking at it like 2-3 years down the road. What do you think the downstream effects of this bill are?
Sure. Yeah. So first, I just want to talk about sort of the constitutionality of this bill because I do think that it's unconstitutional, even though it does pretty much the same thing Obergefell did.
Sure.
If what the left is missing here is that if Obergefell gets overturned, that's because the court has recognized that it is not something required by the 14th Amendment.
Sure.
Now, Section 5 of the 14th Amendment says that all persons born or naturalized in the U.S. and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. Mm-hmm. Now, Section 5 of the 14th Amendment also requires equal protection of the law, and it requires due process of the law, something the federal government will enforce and require the states to maintain. If Section 5 of the 14th Amendment does not require all states to recognize same-sex marriage, which is what a ruling that overrules Obergefell would do, we have very strong Supreme Court precedent, specifically a 1997 case, the city of Bernie v. Flores. That was one of the cases on the RFRA statute. And what that case said is that Congress does not have the power to redefine the 14th Amendment. They only have the power to enforce the 14th Amendment. So I think the entirety of this law would be facially invalid if Obergefell were to be overruled. But perhaps even more significantly than that, a lot of the argument in favor of this act has been on the grounds of the full faith and credit clause, which basically says that states have to honor judicial determinations that are made in other states. Again, they're sort of missing the point there because states don't have to give full faith and credit to determinations of other states that differ with the policy judgments of those states. They only have to do so insofar as it is consistent with the policy judgments of those states. And that ought to be very obvious, because otherwise you could have one state, some kind of rogue actor, doing something ridiculous, like, we charge anybody who kills a chicken with murder. They're murderers in our state. And then say that they require all their neighbors to send those people back to their state to be tried. Stuff like that.
Exactly.
Obviously that's not what it says. And what the left is missing here is that if they were to pass this bill, it's very unlikely that it will be found constitutional if Obergefell were to be overruled. So I think downstream, because there are good constitutional conservative groups that are advocating for the original understanding of the Constitution, I think that we would see this challenged and eventually overruled. But I think the state of play until it gets overruled could be very, very bad for religious people. Because there is nothing in this law that specifically carves out exemption for matters of conscience. I mean, there is one for religious organizations, 501c3s, but not for matters of conscience. Any person who does not run an explicitly Christian organization with bylaws saying, we will exercise our organization consistent with our interpretation of the Bible, and probably be as clear as saying, and have XYZ views regarding marriage, anybody who doesn't do that runs a very high risk of being stripped of their ability to exercise their conscience and the dictates of their faith in peace. On the grounds that they're essentially not a religious organization.
I think a lot of people need to head over to LexRex and probably get the YouTube thing that you guys put up on how to read the mind of the founders.
Yeah, we got that video. We also got a weekly podcast that we put up so that you can get your thinking in line with our founders' vision and understand what our Constitution says.
Yeah, I posted that YouTube today, and I think it's really helpful because, number one, I really like tea. And so I thought that was a great illustration, at least to begin with.
Thanks.
But yeah, I posted that. And but in terms of like, let's just say, for instance, an adoption agency. We only have about 2 more minutes here, Alexander. But an adoption agency just happens to be a Christian adoption agency. This bill gets passed, signed into law by the current occupant of the White House. What happens if a gay couple comes up and wants to adopt a kid from your Christian agency?
Well, if that agency is proactive, if they call up, and there's a lot of nonprofit groups, you don't have to call XREX, you can call one of the others, but if they're proactive and they get it in their bylaws that in accordance with their understanding of scriptures and what the Christian faith requires, they believe that it is morally wrong to adopt a child out to persons of the same sex. If that's in their bylaws, they'll probably be okay. It's organizations that have failed to do that, which is going to be the vast majority of organizations, because I think people are pretty optimistic and they don't think that our society is ever going to go there where it's persecuting people for their faith. Well, I think people who listen to your podcast probably know better.
Sure.
They're already doing that. But if they don't have something like that in explicit language, I think this law does create a substantial risk. Now, that risk was already there as a result of Oberfell, but I think that risk materializes, becomes more concrete when you can cite to a statute.
Sure.
That,
now,
this is the reason why we're doing this.
If folks want to learn more about LexRex, where would they go?
LexRex.org, LEXREX.org. You can also look up the LexRex Institute on YouTube, or just Google LexRex Institute podcast. We got all kinds of resources out there where you can learn about our Constitution and know how to defend your rights.
Well, thank you very much, Alexander Haberbush. We appreciate having you on today, and great to have your expertise on this issue. And we will definitely be calling you again for other issues coming up. And again,
Absolutely.
We'd encourage you, and thank you so much for being on the broadcast today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me. Glad I could be here.
All right. You're listening to Politics in the Pulpit. When we come back, we'll have a brief discussion with Pastor Max Graves in just a few minutes on your hometown station.
It's like no other station I've ever listened to. It's great.
Your hometown station.
All right, we're back here on Politics and the Pulpit. Your holy host, Pastor Jerry Cook, here on your favorite hometown station, KHTS AM 1220 and 98.1 FM. We just got off the phone with Alexander Haberbush with the LexRex Institute. Had a great time talking about the so-called Respect for Marriage Act, but now I want to quickly turn the record over and talk about another issue that's very important and dear to our heart, which is abortion. And some of you might have been on Facebook or anything like that recently and saw a video that I posted or others have posted called The Procedure. I would encourage you to go to my Facebook or just look up The Procedure on YouTube, The Procedure. It's about a 4-minute video that outlines the procedure that many in America call a woman's reproductive rights, but the Bible in common sense calls it murder. Furthermore, it's a true story. I have on the phone with me Pastor Max Graves. He's no stranger to our show. He's the pastor of Liberty Baptist Church in Norwalk, California, and also the Liberty Life Center, which is a pro-life center that helps ladies in need who are pregnant. Pastor Graves, say hello.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Thanks, Pastor, for coming on such short notice. I know that we're going to have a short segment here, but this coming Friday, there's a possibility that you're going to put together some sort of rally or some sort of response to about kind of predicated on this movie, The Procedure. Tell us a little bit about what you're planning on doing. I know it's kind of still a little fluid right now, but what are you planning on doing?
Well, our hope is that we would organize a demonstration in front of one of the major media outlets in Southern California. Our initial hope was possibly NBC4 studios down in Universal City, or possibly the Fox News building in Santa Monica there on Bundy. It's a little bit up in the air still. The best way that I can recommend people to know what's going to happen is to check our Facebook group page called End Abortion California, and that will be updated either this afternoon or later today. But we're trying to put together a demonstration to raise awareness about this video that is just real shocking, a video, a true life story of an ultrasound tech that was called in to be an assistant on what we would call the procedure. That's what the name of the video is. And unknowing to this ultrasound tech, they were being called in to perform an ultrasound during a second trimester abortion on a little girl. And he sees this all transpire right before him as he has the ultrasound machine on the woman's stomach. And it literally changed him forever. And it's a graphic video. It is a shocking video that I think if anybody watches it that can walk away and say that this is somehow acceptable is just, it would be shocking for them to be able to walk away and do that. This video was put together by Choice for Two Ministries. You can research their ministry at choicefor2.com and in conjunction with Lore.tv. They were the producers. And it has some pretty big names attached to it. Kevin Sorbo, who's everybody remembers as Hercules. He's a Christian actor, and he played in God's Not Dead as well. He's the voice that's narrating this video, and so there's some people that got behind this.
I knew I recognized that voice somewhere.
Yeah, Kevin Sorbo.
Well, I can tell you, and Pastor Graves, you've known me for a long time, probably longer than you would like to acknowledge, but the fact is I've seen a lot of horror movies in my life, and I'm not proud to say that I've seen them all, but this was a 4-minute video that actually had an impact on me. And I've seen some abortions in the past, but for some reason this cartoon, which it is a cartoon, and it gives us the idea of what's going on in this procedure, it is actually quite visceral. And I think people should watch it, especially before YouTube decides to turn it down.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that in the first week that it was out, about a month ago, it had over 1.2 million views. And so it's increased, obviously, since then. So it has hit the ground running, and we're hoping to make some waves with it and get the word out because it's something that people need to see. And as you said, it's very interesting that even though it's an animated short video, there's something about the way the animation was done that is it's very impactful. It's an unusual way that it impacts you, and I think people would do well to take a look and spread the word because this is something that our society needs to understand, that the judgment of God is upon our nation for the shedding of innocent blood, and this is another way that we can raise awareness.
Absolutely. That is public on my Facebook, and anybody can share it, and I'm sure the same for you. Pastor Graves, thank you very much for coming in on such short notice, and Lord willing, we'll be able to gather with you whatever we decide to do on this Friday. I know, again, it's fluid, but let's be praying that God will intervene and do something great.
Check in at End Abortion California on Facebook.
End Abortion California on Facebook. Thank you, Pastor Graves. You have a great day. All right, you're listening to Politics in the Pulpit. Let me give you a couple of shameless plugs here before we leave. December 24th, if you need a Christmas Eve service to go to, Freedom's Way Baptist Church will be hosting one at 6:30 on Christmas Eve. On Christmas Day, December 25th, if your church is not having Christmas services, we'll be having ours at 10:30 a.m. And then way into 2023, January 29th, the last Sunday of January, we will have Creation Evangelist Russ Miller at 9:15, 10:30, and 5 o'clock. Check us out on Facebook as well as online, and you can get all that scheduling. Again, you're listening to Politics in the Pulpit. Thank you very much for tuning in today. We'll catch you next week as we... I don't know what we're going to do next week. We're going to have a lot of fun next week. But you're listening again to Politics in the Pulpit on KHTS AM 1220 and FM 98.1, your hometown station.